This PD is designed to help with the first stage of our cycle of teaching and learning, which is the formation of instructional groupings. And for this PD, we'll be addressing the question, how can we effectively form instructional groupings based on our students' readiness to learn? The learning goals for this video PD are firstly to understand the importance of forming instructional groupings, to understand where instructional groupings fit within the cycle of teaching and learning, to apply the data service to form instructional groupings, and to apply learning sequences to record instructional groupings and structure learning for our learners. So we're going to start off firstly with instructional groupings, what they are and how they're used. So instructional grouping involves using assessment of students' readiness to learn to place them into groups that can be used to dynamically structure learning tasks and goals. So what this means is that the groupings that we formed are not going to dictate one particular way of grouping students together and delivering content. They're going to be used dynamically, so in different ways that suit the particular learning needs of students and the particular tasks that are given, but with consideration to their learning needs. So instructional groupings can be used to give students tasks with appropriate levels of scaffolds, or they could be used to form mixed ability groupings to facilitate sharing of knowledge and collaboration. So they're not fixed in terms of the groups that students will be working in, but more of a tool that can be used by teachers to cater learning to the particular learning needs of the cohort of students. The data service that we have at Cranbourne Secondary College provides information on student ability groupings based on their literacy data. This data is used as a key factor in determining students' readiness to learn, as literacy is required to engage in learning in every subject. Formative assessment data specific to subjects can also be used to inform instructional groupings, and instructional groupings can shift based on formative assessment as needed, but what we get from the literacy data from the data service is our starting point, and will probably be used for the majority of instructional groupings. So let's have a look at where instructional groupings fits within the cycle of teaching and learning. So this diagram with the learning architecture shows the process of our cycle of teaching and learning, and at the very start, the very top, is where we look at who our learners are and we analyse accurate and reliable data and evidence to determine those instructional groups. From here, the process goes through our curriculum mapping process, design of tiered summative assessment, summative cognitive assessment tasks, and then we implement the gradual release of responsibility through our learning sequences, and then our cycle of teaching and learning finishes with the moderation and feedback, which then gets fed back into reassessing our instructional groups when we go to a following term, and then following through this process again. Now, curriculum mapping and cognitive assessment tasks are designed so that they usually don't have to be redesigned at the start of every stage, but it's always important to consider the goals and the outcomes of what's expected through the of student learning through the curriculum mapping and cognitive assessment tasks when beginning a new learning sequence and beginning a new cycle as well. In order to help facilitate this full cycle, our best tool during a term is using learning sequences. And there's one particular way that we can use learning sequences effectively, both for identifying instructional groupings and also for flowing through the whole process. So learning sequences can be used to facilitate all steps of the cycle of teaching and learning by downloading a local copy. So all of the learning sequences are located on Office 365 and they're shared, but if you download a local copy and save it to your computer, you can then make changes and modifications to that that can then be fed back in after the end of a term for moderation and feedback, but you can also design it to cater to your particular students as well. So the second dot point, this can be used to record instructional groupings and to make modifications to the learning sequence to target learning accordingly. And we're going to have a look at where we do that. And the third dot point, the changes made that were found to be effective can then be fed back into the shared document at the end of the cycle during the moderation and feedback phase. So after the details of the curriculum mapping in the first part, the first few pages of a learning sequence, the next part is this learning sequence design, which will usually be found on page 2 or 3. And this is the part that when we download a local copy, we can fill in to record our instructional groupings and to consider what modifications and interventions we might want to put in place in order to support our particular group of learners based on the distribution of students in each instructional group. So we actually have 4 instructional groups, which are listed in the table at the top right of this table with the 3 different sections. And the 4 groups are above the expected level in literacy, at the expected level in literacy, nearly at level, and 2 or more levels below. We're going to have a look in a minute at the data service, and the data service will actually really help us to very quickly put our 4 instructional groups in using the data that we have on our students in the area of literacy. So let's have a look at how we form instructional groupings using the data service. Firstly, an introduction to the data service. The data service is an Excel workbook developed to house all of the data that we collect on students in one place. At this point in time, the data that's available includes all NAPLAN results, PAT and on-demand testing. So PAT is progressive achievement testing, and on-demand testing is an adaptive testing system that we use. And we do these tests in both literacy and numeracy, and then these results are used to put students into different groups and also record their growth and progress throughout their time at the college. CAT results are also available at the end of every term. As part of the moderation process, CAT results are uploaded to the data service, and you can actually have a look at a history of students' CAT results in a range of different subjects. Student attendance is also uploaded weekly so that can be tracked as well. Analysis algorithms within the data service provide ready-to-use insights into students in classes. So for a lot of the work that you do to make it easier, you don't have to troll through this data. It's already been collated and prepared in a way that shows you a snapshot of where your students are at compared to the cohort that they are in. To access the data service, we can go to the school documentation folder on Compass. And in the school documentation folder, there is a folder called Data Service. You need to click on that, and then all the current versions of the data service will be in there. Generally, the data service there might be a semester 1 and a semester 2 version because classes do change, and when the class lists change, this is updated and reflected in the data service, but usually both versions will be up in case teachers want to look at some historical data with classes from semester 1, say. When you do download the file, there's a note here that you need to click Enable Content in order to enable the macros that drive the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is set up with a number of functions that you can click buttons that will automatically filter and sort the data and take you to different places. However, you need to make sure that the macros are enabled in order for this to work. So when you download the data service, as with any file that's downloaded off the internet, it will open in protected view. So you need to click the button in the top ribbon that says Enable Editing. Once you have done this, it will pop up with another yellow ribbon which will say Enable Content. And then once you do this, the file will likely, I think when you've done one of these, the file will likely look like it reboots, and you'll be able to click the buttons and use all the functions of the spreadsheet. This is what the main menu of the data service looks like. So once you've enabled it, then it will pop up and it will look like this. And you can see that there are 5 green buttons. The first button contains all of student data, which you can scroll and have a look for the different students. Well, there's a lot of data in there, so a couple of other functions have been put in to make it easier to see the specifics of that data. The first one is a student profile. You can go and look in an individual student's collation of all of their testing results. There is a class profile button which we'll be using today, and this button will actually enable you to select a class and then look at the standards of literacy and numeracy for all those students, but with triangulated data too. So it takes multiple sources of data and then works out a bit of an average based on students' achievement in a number of different tests. There's also a button for attendance data and a button for CAT results, where you can look up individual classes and their CAT results in different subjects. So once we click on the class profile, this is what it looks like. So you can see up the top left, if you do need to navigate back to the main menu, you can click a button there. But to the right of that, there is a space where you can select your class. And if you click on this box, a drop-down list will appear. There's a little arrow that you can click on, and then you can scroll to your class. A lot of classes are in form groups, so like this one, it's the 8i form group. However, if you're in a class that doesn't run in a regular form group, you'll need to scroll down further, and all of the classes are there, including year 9 and 10 electives and VCE classes, as well as any specialist classes that may run. What you see is a snapshot of this data. We can see a number of bits of info about each of the students, including whether or not they're in literacy or numeracy support, high achievers or EAL. We can also see the percentile within their cohort. So in this case, we can see that Hannah Brown, she's in the top 85th percentile for numeracy and literacy, or you could say she's at the bottom 15%. Bianca Buckley is in the top 4% for numeracy compared to the cohort, and the top 1% for literacy. If we have a look across to the right, we can also see the class average as compared to the cohort average for literacy and numeracy, and for our abstract reasoning test as well. But the key thing that we're going to do to form our instructional groups is we're going to click on the button literacy down the bottom right to sort the results by student literacy values. And let's see what that looks like. So when we click that button, it will look something like this. And what we can see is all of our list of students, and we can see their results in the 3 different tests. So we've got NAPLAN literacy, PAT comprehension, which is a progressive achievement test for reading, and then we've got the on-demand test for literacy as well. And what the algorithm does is it takes an average of all of these 3 norm reference tests together, and it triangulates it into an overall rating to provide our 4 instructional groups, which are above level, at level, nearly at level, and well below. If we need to change class, we can click on the change class button down the bottom right, but we can also sort these students based on numeracy as well. And as we do this, we'll see that the groups will change a little bit, as well as the graph that shows you the overall distribution of students as well. Just another note, in terms of formative assessment, there are some subjects that do have formative assessment spreadsheets that they use. These are accessible only on the Y-Drive, and they're accessible by pressing this blue button. So if you try this blue button at home, it will not work. But for most subjects, these spreadsheets aren't used. It's just for those that do, and in which case speak to the subject leaders for that to find out more about that. Okay, let's have a look at a worked example about how we can record instructional groups. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my class of science of 9i, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reiterate what I've done here. I've gone to school documentation, and I've clicked on that, and it's taken me here. I've navigated to the data service folder, and I've found the appropriate one, which is Data Service Semester 1 2020, and I've downloaded that file. And then when I've downloaded that file, it's looked something like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click Enable Editing. And this will open it again in a non-protected view. And then I'm going to click Enable Content. And what that's going to do is that's going to make sure that the macros work, so I can press these different buttons. I'm going to go to Class Profile, and when I go to Class Profile, I can see this is a particular Mylands numeracy group that's currently in here, so I am going to scroll until I find the relevant form group, which is 9i. You can see as I scroll down, there's a lot of different classes that you can select on that are ordered, so you may need to do a bit of scrolling to find your class, but for this one I need to go to 9i. Great. So this is my 9i class. I can see I've got a few EAL students, but I'm going to click on sorting by literacy, and these are my class results currently. So you can see I've got my students who've got their various tests, and then they've got an overall rating. I do have some students that have not completed any tests. This may be because these students have been absent, or they are they're newer students. And this highlights, I guess, the importance of us making sure that we do complete all of our testing where possible, so that this is possible and we have as fewer gaps as possible in order to get our accurate distributions of students. So I'll have to use some of my own formative assessment to place those students in one of these instructional groups. But for the rest of these students, I can actually take the students here and I can put them in my above level group, and then I've got my at level group, my nearly at level group, and my well below group. And then I'll need to consider how I can cater to this particular group. So what I've done is I've downloaded a copy of the learning sequence, and this is for the control and coordination. This is term 1 for year 9. At the start of the learning sequences, I have all of my curriculum mapping, which I need to consider, but then I get to this first section, which is learning sequence design. Now, I've got 2 year 9 classes, so I've added an extra layer to this table, and what I've done is I've put in my instructional groups as they were listed before, and then I have some students that I'll need to redistribute as the term goes on and when I consider for the next term. What I've then done is I've put in any other considerations, and I've put in some thoughts about how I'm going to put interventions in place to support these students, and then I've put in a bit of a reflection about the impact of my teaching and my learning needs after I've completed this, ready for integration into the next learning sequence that I download and implement and do this process with. Okay, so as a summary of what we've done, we've talked about using formative assessment and forming instructional groupings being the first stage of the cycle of teaching and learning. To do this, what we can do is we can download learning sequences as a local copy, and we can record our instructional groupings and modifications to the learning sequence in that, which we can then use for feedback in moderation sessions after the conclusion of the unit as well. And to do all this, the data service can be accessed to determine student readiness to learn from the triangulated literacy data. If you have any questions, please contact me and let me know. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I hope that this is helpful in forming your instructional groups in the future.